Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is David Robinson. I am the Director of Membership and Meetings for the Linguistics Society of America. And let's just take another couple of minutes to wait for the rest of our attendees to get here, and then we'll get started. Thanks very much, and talk to you in just a few. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Again, thank you everyone for joining us. My name is David Robinson. I am the Director of Membership and Meetings for the Linguistics Society of America, the LSA, which is sponsoring this webinar. My pronouns are he, him, his. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to join us, and I hope that you and yours are staying safe and healthy. While I'm talking, you'll be seeing a brief slideshow about the LSA and what we do, and if you're not a member, you'll see some information about a special membership discount for participants in this webinar. So we're excited to present this webinar on the solicitation for the National Science Foundation's DLI-DEL Senior Research and Conference Proposal Grant applications. We're grateful to our panelists for taking the time to participate and to you for being here. I'd like to take a few moments just to let you know how the webinar will work and to make sure you're familiar with the GoToWebinar control panel. So if you'd like to download copies of the slides about the solicitation, you'll find those in the handouts section of your GoToWebinar dashboard. They'll also be available on the webinar page on the LSA website once they'll be available right after the webinar, and the recording of the webinar will also be available on that page no later than tomorrow at the latest. You may also have noticed that your microphones are muted. This is so we don't get miscellaneous background noise from the participants. We do encourage you to ask questions at any time. You'll see there's a questions widget on your GoToWebinar dashboard that you can use to do that. And NSF Linguistics Program Officers Joan and Tyler Kendall will take your questions during the latter part of the webinar. And now, without further ado, I'd like to turn the floor over to Shobhana Chelliah of the University of North Texas. She is a former program officer for DEL, who will review the solicitation. So Shobhana, hang on, and I'll give you the control of the screen. All right, there you go.
Great. Thank you so much, David, and to the LSA for organizing this so quickly. And we're very happy for the opportunity to share information about the new solicitation. My name is Shobhana Chelliah. I was a program officer for DEL from 2012 to 2015. And I'm here with Joan Mailing and Tyler Kendall from Linguistics, as David just mentioned. And we'd like to go over some of the main points of this new solicitation for a program that's been with NSF for since the mid-2000s. So we'll be going through this presentation. It has about 4 parts to it. So first, what's new with this program, and then some kind of standard information about how much you can apply for and so on, what the deadlines are. And then we'll talk about areas of focus and emphasis, both to kind of go over what's in solicitation and also to see if you have questions related to something that you're thinking about, a project that you wanted to put in, to see how those match with the new wording in the solicitation. And then finally, we'll take your questions. So let's go forward and see what's new in this program. The first thing you'll notice is that the name of the program has changed. And let's see, are you able to see my screen? There we go. The name of the program has changed from Documenting Endangered Languages with the Data Infrastructure Computational Methods still holding steady. It's only the Documenting Endangered Languages has now moved to NSF Dynamic Language and Infrastructure. The National Endowment for the Humanities, NEH, has been a partner in this venture from the very beginning, and they continue with the name Documenting Endangered Languages for their program. Now, I was not at NSF when this change occurred, and so I'd like to just maybe think with you on what the change of this name means and why it may have been changed, because when I see the term Documenting Endangered Languages as a program name, it feels to me to be a little static, and it feels like maybe data is collected, speech events are collected, and they're sort of put together in some sort of documentation archive, and then that's it. But we know as documentary linguists that we do a lot more than that. We are, yes, collecting data, that's for sure, but from what we collect, there are produced so many different types and varieties of products, going all the way from, just transcription and translation to corpora, to grammars, and to, new discoveries in linguistic theory, and so on. So I feel like NSF Dynamic Language Infrastructure expresses a little bit better the idea that we're moving with the times, we're using the tools, the computational tools that are available to us, and that we're producing these linguistically rich infrastructure for uses for many different audiences. So that's how I take it, that it's just sort of a change of name that's moving with this technology piece added. And we're going to see more of that as we move along and look at the focus and emphasis part of the program. So the name of the program has changed. The other part that has changed, let me try to move forward here, is the deadline. So before, the deadline for senior research proposals and conferences was once a year, mid-September. Now, instead of a deadline, what we have is a target date. And I think later on, Joan and Tyler maybe can explain how target dates work, but my understanding is the deadline, that was it. You had to get it in on that date. With the target dates, it can be a few days before, a few days later. You need to, I think, talk with your program officer to say, expect this from me. I'm waiting for this one piece to come in, perhaps, but they are not hard and fast deadlines. And the big thing also is now you'll have 2 opportunities per year to submit. We hope that this will, I suppose one of the main things that this will also do is to encourage more submissions. Perhaps there could be revisions in between one submission and the other. So this year, the first date is November 18th, 2020. It's coming right up. And then the next opportunity you'll have is in February. And then following that, there'll be a February date every year and a September date every year. And that is posted on the solicitation. When you go on the website, if there's a holiday or something like that, you should probably check and see, did it go back? Did it go forward one day? It may go forward one day if there's a holiday. So deadline has changed to target date, and we have 2 now. The other big change is that previously the NEH fellowships were managed by the NSF DEL program officer. The fellowships have now moved to under NEH Management. And there is apparently, Tyler was mentioning before we started that there was recently a webinar given, perhaps by Dr. Stephanie Walker, who runs that program. And there's a link to their to their program page on this slide, and Tyler may put that in the chat for you so you can grab that. This fellowship program is excellent if you're, say, getting ready to retire and you have that one project you need to finish off. You can take that 1 year in the transition period to finish it off with a fellowship, or you're trying to set up a project. So even when you're starting out, it's a great opportunity for starting and finishing up of projects, that 1 year of or 6 months of intense work. So look that up, but NSF is not managing those at this point. The other thing that you want to be aware of is that there is a DLI-DEL doctoral dissertation research improvement grant availability. And so for students who are interested in working in this area, they can go to the solicitation and learn more about it. Okay. So now let's look at some general award information, which is really, I think, useful for you to keep in mind when you're preparing your budget and thinking about how competitive your proposal needs to be. There are about 20 to 25 of these senior awards given out each year, and the maximum you can get for an award is $450,000 for 3 years. So it's like $150 a year, and there are not a lot that hit that high bar. So think carefully about your proposal budget. Know that if you are an institution of higher education in the US, you can apply. One thing I read about in the solicitation that I found very interesting is that if you're a US institution of higher education and have a branch office overseas, for example, if it's Princeton, Dubai, or something like that, the office in Dubai, you as a PI in Dubai from Princeton can apply. This, I think, opens up a lot of interesting opportunities for training, infrastructure building in that overseas region, and also bringing students there to train them when we're in a post-pandemic world. But we could look into that. Also, if you are a nonprofit, a non-academic organization, or a tribal organization, you can apply. Remember that the awards go to the institution or the organization. They don't go to individuals. Only the fellowships go to individuals. So you have to be really associated with one of these groups to be eligible to apply. And then the other thing to know is that if you are applying for one of these senior proposals, you can only apply to one, and also you can only apply, you can only submit that proposal to one program at the foundation. Like, you can't do the same proposal to several different and try to get monies from them. That won't work. But you can apply for a senior proposal and a conference at the same time. You should always keep an eye out for the NSF general guidelines. I believe it's the PPAG, it's the proposal guidelines that come out. They're revised very frequently, and there will be, you know, foundation level changes there that usually your sponsored office will know about. Like when the data management plans became mandatory, those were announced in those guidelines. So keep an eye out for those as well. So that's just very general award information. Now let's go on to looking at something about the program description. So this is where the solicitation looks a little different than it did in previous years. One thing we see right at the beginning is the solicitation affirms something that we've known about NSF and NEH, and that is from the early 2000s, people at NSF and NEH said their language loss is a problem and that we need to address this imminent loss of linguistic and cultural knowledge, and that is a priority for both these agencies. And one way that we can do this is to have linguists and communities working with linguists document those that knowledge that is being lost. So that still remains an area of importance and priority for both agencies. What has changed is that in the interim, technology has developed to an extent where now we can really improve and speed up that documentation that we want to do to address the imminent loss of these languages. And so it sort of behooves us to say, well, what technology is out there and how can we integrate that technology to our methodologies and to our outputs so that we can produce better documentation, more useful documentation for more users. So what is the program doing now? Well, it's still focusing on documenting those languages, but it's also saying that we can talk about the value of what we're doing by showing how it can be integrated into the scientific exploration of language, or linguistic theory, language typology, and so on. How these things that we're collecting can work along with how we as scientists, language documenters, can work along with those people who are working on human language technologies, one, to improve our documentation, and two, to help improve the way that human language technologies are changing and improving themselves over the years. And how we can look at the things that we're collecting not as these individual pockets of information, but to harness the power of technology to create data sets, to create language information infrastructure that is comparable and shareable across languages, because nowadays we have the technology to compare across them. So to me, that's really exciting. I am currently the PI on a grant to work on a language called Dimasa, which is spoken in Assam and Northeast India. Hardly any documentation on it, but the neighboring language, Boro, has a lot of information on it. So we're trying to create these comparable corpora to use our information on Boro to understand differential marking in Dimasa. So that project, I think, shows something about the fact that we're documenting Dimasa. That's the first bullet. We're integrating that language information for scientific exploration. We want to learn more about differential marking. We are using common data sets to compare across those. So, and using technologies to write scripts to compare across those languages to see what the triggers for differential marking are. This is the kind of thing I think that is meant by this new solicitation. We're not giving up on our old activities. For example, we're still looking at an emphasis area of language description. We're still looking at people conducting field work. And perhaps at this pandemic time, we're looking at curating existing work and making that usable so that when field work is available, possible, we'll be ahead a little bit. We're looking at supporting people creating access to the things that are collected through transcription, translation, and then outputs of those, the creation of grammars, text collections, databases, for example, word lists, so that we can do historical, do some kind of a historical reconstruction. And then the projects that really seem to stand out are ones that say, we're going to do the fieldwork part, we're going to do the creating access part, but we're also going to show how there's a uniqueness to this language in some linguistic feature that's going to help us learn better about the related languages and document those better, or even perhaps improve linguistic theory. So integrate and use what we learn for linguistic analysis. That's one of our emphasis areas, language description. Another emphasis area that's listed in the solicitation is infrastructure. So, for example, you can host a conference to think about standards, procedures, methodology for a particular region where documentation is being done, a language family, or even broader. And so that people can then learn. So for example, you remember the emailed project, the electronic metadata for endangered language documentation. I think that was what emailed stood for. That was an infrastructure building project that NSF supported. And many of us learned from all of the instruction and examples that were provided by by emailed. And so that kind of gathering is supported again by this program. Also digitizing of existing materials. Some of the archives have applied for material for funds for doing that. And so that is another emphasis area. Then we find that computational methods is another area that is supported specifically by the SISE Directorate. It's Computer Information Science and Engineering Directorate of NSF. And what they're interested in is improving computational tools, creating computational tools for tagging, parsing, speech recognition, like the work of Christian DeCanio, or grammar induction, like the work of Emily Bender. And to do that, to partner with somebody who is working in the language documentation field and creating data sets that could feed into these computational studies. And I think the important thing for us as documentary linguists to recognize here is that we are not giving data to computer scientists so they can do what they like with it, but there is a true symbiotic relationship here, because we benefit when a tagger, parser, speech recognizer is created, where we can then do better transcription, automatic alignment, and so on. So our workflow is greatly improved, and it allows us to do more and better documentation. And so that is, I think, that great relationship with computer science that we can try to always think about when we're putting our collections together, our data together. So they, in turn, are challenged because most of the work that's done in computational linguistics, of course, is done with huge data sets. And here we are with these much smaller ones. And so the computational linguists say, well, how do I train and test my model with smaller corpora? Where do I need to have human intervention? Where do I need to add typological information to improve the outcomes of the kinds of analyses that we're trying to work towards? So if you're interested in this, if you yourself are a computational linguist and have some ideas, if you're working together with linguists and you have some ideas for projects, contact Terry Langenden. His email information is here to learn more about what is supported by their program. So basically you would submit to the DLI-DEL deadline, and when your proposal is being evaluated, the computational linguistics, the SISE program officers will look at it and consider it to see if it is appropriate and fits what they are looking for in their program. Okay, and then another partnership that is relatively new, I think started in 2015 or 2016, is the partnership with the TEAC program, which is part of the Education Directorate at NSF. Tribal colleges and universities have been supported by the government, through funding through NSF to develop infrastructure, curriculum, and so on. And so with this program, what you have to be aware of is it supports money's going to a tribal college or university to support infrastructure building and curriculum and kind of investigations, maybe documentation happening at that university, and somebody who is a professor or a linguist at another institution can partner with them or support them in that endeavor. So the monies go to the TEAC institution, and so you should contact Laura Chase or Jeremy Ginn, and their email addresses are given on this slide as well, to learn more about how to make this partnership with a TEAC institution work if both you as a linguist who's not TEAC and the TEAC institution want to do a documentation project. It's a very powerful way of supporting young students at Native American institutions to teach them about archiving, data annotation, analysis, working with their own language. So we hope that there are some of you who are interested, and I'm sure some of the previous ones that have been funded can give you some ideas on how to pursue those projects. Finally, I think this is the last one. There are partnerships with Arctic Social Sciences. So if you have a project that has to do with, for example, Alaska Native communities, then this would be the place to go. And the contact information for Erica Hill is provided on this slide as well. So, and then finally, of course, the National Endowment for Humanities Preservation and Access has been a partner in this endeavor from its very inception. And if you're interested, you can watch the DEL videos on how to put it in a successful proposal. The first video there is about the history of the program, and you'll see how NEH and NSF have partnered on this. So here are the contact folks at NEH. It would be great for you to visit their site because they have sample proposals. You can see the kind of publicity that they do for their proposals to see what interests them. And of course, we have Stephanie Walker's contact information on this slide as well. The one thing I'd like you to notice is that rather than the DEL, now called DLI-DEL program shrinking, it has expanded in interest across the National Science Foundation. Arctic has put in monies, SCIES has put in monies, TEAC is supporting it, and NEH has been a steady partner. So the base budget of DEL can continue to expand as we, as documentary linguists, make clear how our work is of relevance to different programs. So it's great to see, and I'm sure in the next 4 or 5 years we'll see another pot of money coming in from another program. I have hope. All right, so this slide is a very important one. Where to go for language revitalization projects. As language documenters, our hearts and our goals as scientists is to support the communities that we work with. Many of those communities have come to us and said they are desperate, they need help in preservation and maintenance and spreading the word about their culture and their language to the youth of the communities. It's a matter of their whole society's well-being to do it. It's not a small matter at all. And we know that as language documenters, the documentation that we're creating feeds into pedagogy. It feeds into things like subtitling on videos, which was so difficult to do before, but now it's done quite easily and by many communities themselves. We've helped with that by doing transcriptions. The grammars and things that we create go into the development of pedagogical materials. We can do better, for sure. We can remember that we have many users of our documentation. It's not just linguistic science, it's not just the CompLing folks, it's not just creating documentation, it's also pedagogy. And so we need to be aware that we're collecting information that can be used for pedagogy. That is absolutely true. But we need to remember that the National Science Foundation doesn't support the creation of pedagogical materials or meetings and institutes that are for language teaching, language learning, language revitalization, culture revitalization. Rather, for those kinds of activities and products, we direct you to the Native Language Program of the Administration for Native Americans. And these are large projects. Many communities around the country have received these. There are examples of these that are, I believe, available to look at, but there is a link here where you can go and learn more about the ANA programs. What the DLI-DEL community of researchers can do is to always keep in mind that what they're producing for archiving and for publication and for their data sets always has that other user in mind, to prioritize also the collection of information that'll be useful for language revitalization. But the program itself cannot focus and does not focus on revitalization. I hope I've explained that in an effective way, but please ask questions if you have any. Okay, I know there's a lot of information. We're winding down on the specifics of the information, but this particular slide on data management has become something quite important for DLI-DEL projects. So please do take note of this. When you start planning your project, you should be thinking about where that permanent record of your language is going to go. Remember, a goal of documentary linguistics, right, is to create a lasting record of the language you're documenting. Well, where is that information going to go so it becomes a lasting record? You need to find an archive. You need to select that archive from a list of sort of, or at least get, contact somebody from the Delamon group. It's delamon.org, I believe, and ask them, I'm collecting information on language X with community Y, and where do you think we should be archiving the information from what we're doing for our documentation project. Contact the archivist and get a letter from them saying that they will accept your deposit, and produce a 2-page timeline and workflow. Integrate the workflow for archiving into your project. And on this slide is listed all the places in your project where you have to mention the archiving piece in the project summary, in the project description, and in your budget. So it is really a very important part of your proposal. Okay. Let's go on. All right, now this statement of consultation is something that I'm going to comment on and ask that after I'm done, Joan comments on as well. So when I was at NSF, this statement of consultation was added or restated in the solicitation. And so you need to add in the supplementary documents, other supplementary documents, area of FastLane or grants.gov, an explicit statement that you have consulted with the relevant parties in the speech communities. And then there's a second statement here that you should ensure that you have asked for the appropriate permissions about your proposed research. So you need to provide a statement of that sort coming from yourself. If you have a letter from the speech community, this would be my question to Joan. That would also go under other supplementary documents, and is that letter also something we're looking for as a must-have, or is it an optional addition? But there has to be some statement of consultation with the community that you're working with them. Okay, all right, so that kind of ends that part of our presentation. We've gone over what's new, why we think these new things have come in, all of the different ways and different focus areas. I hope that you have many ideas for submitting proposals. The best way to support the program is to submit proposals, and to submit a proposal sometimes is scary because you have to write the proposal. And the more you write of these, the easier it gets. And so I think you just have to jump right in. So let's look at some grant writing tips. Okay, so these are tried and true. But one thing that is particular to DEL, DLI, is the planning of the project cannot happen outside of the partnership with the community. More and more what we're finding is that speech communities, speaker communities are seeking the help of a linguist, or they themselves have linguists who are trained in their communities who are then working with communities to figure out what needs to be done, what do they want to have documented, who are the people who are going to be contributing to the project, and so on. So when you write up when you conceptualize your project, think, am I hovering in? Am I helicoptering in? Or am I really doing this the way that documentary linguistics is fashioned these days, or the way that it's expected to be done these days, which is in conjunction with community? There are two major parts to your proposal: intellectual merit and broader impacts. Under intellectual merit, you can look at what scientific knowledge of language in general is pushed forward by the kind of documentation you're going to be doing. What is it that's really unique about this language? We're going to learn more about other languages by documenting this language. And then in terms of transformative ideas, this is a kind of an old idea for NSF. They used to use this a lot more in the past. But you can think about things like, are you pushing methodology forward? Are you pushing partnerships forward in some way? For example, in the project that I mentioned to you, we talked about trying to get native speaking linguists working with native speakers to talk about differential marking by looking through data in a specific way. And we felt that that was something we could write, is an idea of moving some sort of methodology forward. So that would be one example. So for the DLI-DEL program, there are specific things that reviewers look at. And you should know that this is what reviewers are looking at. What is the degree of endangerment of the language? What's the urgency and need for documentation? It doesn't just have to do with numbers, right? It can have to do with domains of use shrinking. It can have to do with political instability, so that people are migrating out of traditional lands. So there are many ways that you can look at degree of endangerment and urgency for documentation. What is the existing documentation of the language? So you could say piece A, B, and C, like for example, there's a grammar, there's a dictionary, but there's no collection of connected speech. So you're showing where the need is for this documentation project. What is that special thing that we're going to learn? Linguistic, historical, cognitive, cultural, social significance. The reason we're able to say this is because I think we have sort of faith, we have knowledge from past experience that each of these languages really does seem to reveal something very special. So, and you yourself as a researcher got interested in this language for a reason. So that's what you might want to spell out here to tell the reviewers, yes, this is something that everyone can learn from if we fund this project for documentation. And then capacity building within the speaker community, creating resources that can be useful to them and collaboration with them will definitely be something that people look at in the broader impacts part of the proposal. So a very quick kind of overview. If you just do a search or for the DEL videos on how to write a successful proposal, you'll see that there are small videos for each of these things. How do you address intellectual merit? How do you address broader impacts and so on? So please do take a look at that if this goes by very quickly. But intellectual merit is not just the scientific discovery, but it also has to do with, do you have the right group of people to successfully get to where you want to go? Is the budget reasonable? And is the timeline reasonable? Have you over or under promised? A lot of times we feel like we want to stuff everything into a proposal that we're going to do. It's going to take, 20 years to do, but it's only a 3-year proposal. So all of these things go into looking at the merit, the intellectual merit of that proposal. So those things that I just mentioned, if you're having writer's block, you can just write those things down and say, okay, I don't know, but I'm just going to start with the timeline. What is it that I want to do first? Who's going to be working with me to achieve and go from point A to point B? And as soon as you start working on that, a lot of these other things start to fill in. Don't try to do this in a month. Think about your proposal as something that's going to take at least 6 months, if not longer, to think through. And also, I strongly advise that you have a group of people that you talk to regularly about the proposal so that they can say, hey, but you didn't think about this, but you're saying you're going to use 2 people, but what are those researchers really going to be doing, and so on. They can ask you questions that you wouldn't have thought of because you're too close to it. So broader merits, broader, I should say broader impact, intellectual merit, broader impacts is what that should say. Broader impacts looks at, it could be societal impact, it could be impact to the field, like new methodologies or improving infrastructure somewhere, training students, undergraduate and graduate students. And so broader impacts also has several different possibilities. And so again, I would lay those different possibilities out and think to myself, am I helping train students through this? Okay, great. If not, if I hadn't thought of it, think about that. Can I bring undergraduate students into this project? How would that work? Same thing with society. What am I providing to the society that I'm working with? What am I just writing, like a picture book? That was something we did 15 years ago. What am I doing now? Am I training some of the young people there in annotation so that they can be hired down the road? So think about how you're capacity building with the community that you're working with, and so on. So write those things down, those broad categories down for broader impact, and then use that as your guide to see if you've missed something in, just in your general thinking about the project. You may not have thought about these specifics. Project workflow, very important. People who are reviewing are going to be looking at that and seeing if it looks like it's feasible in the way that you've laid it out. So in your narrative, you will have specifically a section that says intellectual merit. You will have a section that says broader impacts. And typically people put in a timeline or project workflow section. And it is required for you to put in something on results from previous grants. And that results from previous grants also has to be divided into broader impacts and intellectual merit of the monies that you've gotten before. What was the intellectual merit of it, and what were the broader impacts? And remember, data management has to be part of in your narrative outline as well. Right. Okay, I have found that writing a budget is a really useful way of conceptualizing my project. It may not be the first thing that I do, but it does help me think, like, what do I need? Who do I need to be working with? How long do they need to be on the project with me? And so on. Your institution should have somebody who can help you work through the exact numbers, because it's different from institution to institution. In Texas, we have required amounts for level 1, level 2, level 3 RAs, depending on if they're MA level, PhD level, and so on. And there's a sheet that our budget officer has that she can use to help us fill in those numbers. But what I do when I'm trying to write up my budget application is I have just a blank sheet of paper, and I put down all the categories, and here they are listed for you on this slide. Who are the personnel? Senior personnel would be, for example, the primary investigator, co-PIs, maybe project manager. Then you have the students, undergraduate, graduate. Remember, tuition benefits can be added. And then you have money for the archivists and so on. Like that, I think this is what I mean by curators. You may have somebody who's gathering and archiving materials with you. So these different divisions, these different categories that you see on this slide would be ones that you could start with. There could be many others that you add. For example, you might have a whole nother university that wants to work with you, but there's also going to be a PI there. That would be a kind of a collaborative grant. They would write their budget, you would write your budget. Or there may be a a researcher elsewhere who's going to be contributing and say, this is how much it's going to cost me to contribute. That would be a kind of sub-award. So writing your application budget at our university, we actually get help from this from our college, and we have somebody who sits with us and helps us think through the first draft. And over the course of several months, it changes as our project and proposal changes. That's how I work. I like to start very early with my budget because it helps me think through the concept of the proposal. All right, I think that we are close to being finished. So this NSF evaluation procedures, Joan and Tyler can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there's like an automatic compliance check that happens early on. In any case, there is a person that used to check, and then afterwards there was some sort of automatic check. DLI-DEL proposals often have problems at this level for some reason. There's like a real obvious thing that's missing, like 2-page bio is 2.5 pages or something like that, you know. So make sure that you check in that PPAG what is needed for each of those pieces, those additional documents that need to be submitted. Compliance check can flush out a proposal because something is wrong, and then you're given like 24 hours, or if somebody's generous, 48 hours to correct those errors. After you submit, it goes out for ad hoc review. So if I submit something, Joan might send it out to 3 or 4 reviewers who are our colleagues who know something about the language family. They will send in their review about the intellectual merit and broader impacts. Then a panel of experts, again from our community of researchers, is convened. There is always somebody who's representative of the Native American community. We try to find people who are, if there are South Asian proposals from South Asia, we find somebody who knows about those, and so on. So the panel is convened, taking into consideration the proposals that are going to be reviewed. Then the panel gives recommendations. The program officer sends those recommendations with notes to the division for division approval, and then it has to also go to the Division of Grants and Agreements for approval there. So there's several steps that have to be done. Meanwhile, you'll have to be working on your IRB, clearance. Okay. So here is our final slide of the great people who are working at NSF that you can contact: Joan Mailing, Tyler Kendall, who are here, Jody Chase, Terry Langenden, and Erica Hill. So I will end with that and turn it over to Joan and Tyler to answer questions. And I'm here too. Thank you.
Yeah, and there will be times when I think I'll want to defer to Shobhana, depending on the question. You'll see that David has put in, various people have been posting questions, and he's posted for some of the ones with simple answers. So let me see if I can review them and try to catch up on the questions. We talked about the limit on PIs is 1 per target date. And of course, conference proposals are not included that. So you can be the co-PI on a regular research project and also be the co-PI on a conference proposal. So they are considered separately, as are, of course, the dissertation proposals. And that's sort of standard. The same faculty member can be the PI on more than one dissertation, and those are not included in the limit either. Someone asked, is there a preference for working with US-based language communities as opposed to working with communities in Asia or Africa? No. The program has always funded projects all over the globe. The only exception, obviously, Shobhana mentioned our partnership with NSF's TEAC program. That's US tribal colleges and universities. So obviously, any co-funding that comes from the TEAC program is obviously only going to go to projects that involve US tribal colleges. but otherwise there's no preference. So whatever language you're working on, you can submit a proposal. How strictly is endangered languages defined? The questioner works on Paraguayan Guarani. I think I just lost part of the question there.
Joan, I can finish it if you want.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
yeah, why don't you read the whole question?
Okay, I work on Paraguayan Guarani, which is not endangered in the strict sense, yet its intense and long-standing contact with Spanish is definitely affecting the language. I'm wondering whether the DLI-DEL would consider funding such areas.
Yes, again, it's up to the proposer to make the argument that the language or some aspects of it are endangered. I think particularly for languages, I mean, often, obviously, these minority languages are under pressure from the national language. And you can make that, so one of the things that you could look at then would be how that pressure, changes, affects the, in this case, Guarani. In cases like that, the regular linguistics program also is interested. It could be interested in the project. So if there's some theoretical focus, we could, we might co-review.
Joan, can I just jump
Yeah.
in there?
So
sure. Just to add to that, I mean, a thing to keep in mind when writing a proposal is that one of your main audiences is the reviewers. I mean, in many ways, that's your main audience. So questions about the endangerment status of a language, aren't really things that NSF necessarily is going to have a strict, measure for. Instead, it's about convincing reviewers that the project, is important, is urgent, and so on. And in many ways, the challenge for the DLI competition is, how urgent is this project in comparison to other projects? But there's no strict, is this language endangered or not sort of bar that is used.
I guess there's a follow-up question on, and talking about endangered dialects. Would proposals including endangered dialects associated with otherwise non-endangered standard languages be considered? I think those, will probably always have lower priority. I think would be the answer to that. So you could submit a proposal, and again, that's something where perhaps the linguistics, you could write up a one-page description of your project, perhaps, and send it to us so we can make an we can assess the relevance to either the DLI-DEL or to the linguistics program, or possibly co-review in the two, depending on the particular situation. But I think it's, if we're talking about dialects of standard languages, let's say the many dialects of Italian, for example, or Spanish, they aren't going to be high priority for DEL. It has a very small program budget, and so the priority is going to go to, other projects.
I'll just add to that there is, of course, still the linguistics program. So projects that have some, target involving advancing the language sciences, might have to do with endangered dialects, and those could certainly go to the linguistics program. Let's see, there's a short and easy question which asked a bit more about the mid-February deadline, and I'll just jump in and respond to that. Yeah. So that is new, and that's a big piece of the new solicitation, and that is simply an additional deadline. So now, instead of there being only one deadline a year, there's 2 deadlines a year. So that is for full regular research proposals and conference proposals. Yeah. Dissertation grants there's no deadline for those. They're just accepted at any time. So the main addition here is that you can submit a proposal twice per year.
Yeah. Okay. There's a question about essentially about how to deal with the pandemic. I think right now, I mean, certainly we have been asking, even in this past cycle, for all PIs to provide what were COVID-19 contingency plans. So I think you need to write the proposal, particularly because most fieldwork proposals are say 3-year projects. So hopefully, we all hope that at some point in the next 3 years, you will be able to go back to doing fieldwork. I don't know that as usual will quite make it. I think there will be changes, but certainly you should talk about you know, what you will do if you can do field work in the normal way. But there should also be a discussion of contingency plans. I think particularly this year, and it will affect your timeline clearly. If you can't, if it's still not possible to do field work in the normal way, say in June, that's going to delay your time plan. So yeah, this year I think is going to be challenging in many ways, but you know, describing the timeline for your research project is going to be one more of those challenges.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, Joan, I think that one could, you know, the fact that we can't kind of go to the field, we can take that opportunity for our slow start of our project to really get everything ready in the sense of doing all of the reading that we need to do, looking at the things that have already been published, and maybe getting some of that data into a usable form. So there's a lot of preparation that we often don't have time to do, but we can write that in as those 3 or 4 months of how you're kind of really getting your field work as soon as you hit the ground running when you actually get there. So maybe it can be written as prep time.
Okay. There was another question, I thought a very interesting question from someone in the audience about the use of the label consultant. And the person said, the label consultant is always problematic for my university as it connotes big money people, not the poor speaker in the village where I work. It actually turns out that the label consultant now is problematic from NSF, I think, for exactly that reason. So we would be perfectly happy. We don't insist that you call them native speaker consultants, because consultants for NSF also tends to, you know, to carry with it, I think, that exact connotation that you're hiring, you know, somebody. It's not just the usual native speaker, you know, the fees that you pay someone for, you know, for their time in, say, issuing, you know, in giving and providing data, grammaticality judgments, you know, et cetera. So we're open. I don't have a particular term. I know when, you know, decades ago when I was, you know, in grad school, we used the term informant. That's become you know, not used for, you know, for other reasons. Shobhana says she uses language expert. So that's fine, or just use native speaker. So language expert, native speaker experts, be creative. And please don't put those funds on the budget line that's called for consultants, which I think is line G3. Don't call them consultants. Okay, with other questions? Yeah, thank you, Shobhana. Have we covered?
I think you've covered all the questions that came. Oh, there's one more that has just now come in, and I'll go ahead and read it to you, if you don't mind staying for a few extra minutes.
No, fine.
Regarding the computational methods emphasis, would it still need to include a component of new data collection, or could it be solely focused on, e.g., working on already collected or archived data?
I wish Terry were here, Terry Langen, to answer that, but my sense is that it could be, it would not necessarily have to involve the collection of new data.
Yeah, I agree, Joan, because there's so many things that have been archived that are not accessible right now, but people are looking at computational methods for looking at PDFs and, like, you know, being able to use that information. So
Yeah,
yeah.
to be able to use it. And of course, under the current, COVID challenges, I mean, in fact, that kind of project, can get going, without any problem. You're not collecting new data, so you don't have that problem. So sure.
All right, and one more has just come in just this instant, so I'll read that too. How central is documentation to these funding grants? What if one's project requires a lot of consultation of native speakers on indigenous languages, but the focus is more on a formal grammatical analysis of specific phenomena rather than description of the language?
Shobhana, you want to try that one?
I feel that sounds like a linguistics project. So I guess I would ask the questioner, do you mean that the data that you're collecting would only be targeted to a few instructions? In that case, the reviewers would look at that and say, this does not really meet the bar of creating a lasting record of language. It's only creating a subset that can't be used for understanding the entire language. So I think it would have problems with the reviewers if it was very targeted. But what if there was a previous grant that had done a lot of that? Now this person says, I'm going to zero in on just this feature. I feel like it's still more of a linguistics proposal.
I think one of the things, to recognize, you could, write the proposal up and submit it. We are flexible, and if after getting reviews and having it discussed at the by the advisory panel, if we feel that it really is more appropriate for linguistics, we would just transfer it.
So yeah, I wanted to actually say something about that too. So Shobhana pointed out, made a really important point earlier in the presentation. You can't submit the same project twice at the same time to NSF. So you can't submit a proposal to linguistics and also a proposal to DLI-DEL for the same project as separate proposals, but you can submit one proposal and ask both programs to review it. And that's sort of what Joan's getting at here. I mean, I think the main consideration as a PI, as someone writing the proposal, is how you frame it and where you're gonna, how you're gonna be most convincing. And so, it might be, if you're really doing a linguistic analysis, the best chance for that proposal is to really explain why that analysis is important in terms of, generalizable knowledge about language and so forth, and submit it to the linguistics track, and maybe ask for co-review by DLI-DEL if there's a piece that contributes to documentation and infrastructure and so on. But you can make that decision as you work on the proposal. As Joan says, if you submit it to one and it comes in and the merit review process indicates that it should have gone to the other place, that's not a disaster. That's something that the process can handle.
Great. Well, if you have time, we have one more question.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Do dictionary making projects fit into this? Suppose I have a lot of data collected from older days and perhaps more to collect, and I want to make a comparative dictionary of a group of related languages and dialects. Would this be, quote, documentation of the languages, close quotes, even if it involves multiple related languages?
Shobhana, do you have any?
Yeah, the answer, yes, it would. Given, endangered status of the language would be important, but yes, DEL, DLI has supported dictionary projects. Yeah,
I think that's the infrastructure piece of this, and you'd want to make the case that this resource that you'd be developing advances, the capabilities for people to work with the language data, and to advance the use of earlier documentation and so on. So that would be the key, would be explaining. I think it's probably, to be frank, a proposal that's just out to sort of organize data. You have to publish a dictionary might not be the most competitive proposal. It'd certainly be something that could be submitted, but I think, you know, thinking about it from a kind of infrastructural perspective, and how are you, you know, taking advantage of the data that exists to make it more useful, and really pitching a proposal that way that ends up resulting in a dictionary might be a more compelling way to put it for the program.
Great. Well, that looks like it is all of our questions. So thank you again to our panelists for sharing your time and your expertise with us. And many thanks to all of you in the audience for taking time out of your day to be with us. Get those proposals in, and let the folks at NSF know if you have any questions. And as far as this webinar, we'll have a recording of it available if you need to go over it again. Possibly this afternoon, but at any rate, no later than tomorrow, and we'll let you know when that's ready. So thanks again, everyone, and have a good rest of the day.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
David. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
David.
Bye now.
Thanks, Shobhana.
Thanks.